The life of Julie Andrews, the iconic voice of Mary Poppins in many musical compositions, is anything but idyllic as she approaches the age of 90.
Her life has been a roller coaster of ups and downs, but she has always managed to inspire others with her beautiful voice and overcome devastating obstacles.
The much-loved Hollywood star, what happened to her?
Keep watching as we reveal the sad truth about her life right now.
As Mary Poppins would put it, Julie Andrews is absolutely picture-perfect, yet her life narrative is far but typical.
Julie Andrews was a young woman whose life was shrouded in mystery and whose voice was big before she became the beloved star of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, before she captivated Broadway audiences, and long before she received an Oscar. Her story takes a cinematic turn at this point.
Let us take a brief diversion before reaching that frightening revelation. Julie was born Julia Elizabeth Wells in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, England on October 1, 1935. Her lifelong dream was to be an actress.
Her stepfather was a vocalist, and her mother was a pianist. She took her stepfather's surname. As a result, she was born with a musical spirit. On the other hand, this is somewhat surprising. Her actual father was obscure to her. The plot twists at that point. With her mother on her side, a musical prodigy named Julie enters a social event at the tender age of 14. What she really wants is just a normal night in, with maybe some light music and nice chat. However, her mother unexpectedly takes her away and introduces her to an unfamiliar man. Not any old man, though, he was her biological father. Julie's mom had been hiding a major secret from her daughter, who had always been led to believe her stepfather was her biological father. She was now meeting her biological father for the first time. For little Julie, that was a terrifying time.
Possibly a bit embarrassing, emotional, and perplexing. In that kind of circumstance, what are you even supposed to say?
When Julie was a kid, she lived in a world full with danger, dread, and difficulties. Her upbringing was definitely not idyllic. Envision yourself as a little child who dreams of singing in a warm, welcoming home, but instead you live in a world where the continual din of bombs and air raid sirens makes it impossible to concentrate. During the terrible London Blitz, it is precisely what Julie Andrews encountered.
Keep waiting if you thought that was bad.
Because Julie had to fight not only for survival in the war but also for control of her own home. However, that shocking portion will be revealed shortly. To begin, let us rewind the clock to a period when little Julie lived through one of the darkest periods in human history.
Throughout the months of 1940 to 1941, London, Julie's native city, was one of many major British cities targeted by Nazi Germany's relentless raids.
There was more than one incident here. The 8 months were filled with fear.
Explosions, rather than stars, illuminated the night sky. In subterranean bomb bunkers, families held on tightly as the earth trembled. They would emerge the following morning, crossing their fingers that their homes were intact. Far from it. Not all of the children were removed to the countryside for protection. Julie Andrews was one of the survivors who lingered to see the devastation for herself. Do you have any idea? As bombs detonate outside your window, you attempt to fall asleep. When you're living in constant terror now, how can you hope for a brighter future? There was a severe lack of food. You couldn't eat anything you wanted because of rationing. Is that sugar? A splurge? What about real fruit?
Oh, I hope you can locate it somehow. In spite of everything, Julie managed to find a way to sing. As she spoke, her voice brought solace to those around her and herself amidst the mayhem. The worst thing, though, is about to happen. No child should have to endure the horrors Julie endured at home, much less the horrors of the war. As bombs dropped from the sky on London, Julie's house became its own little battleground. It was expected that her stepfather, Ted Andrews, would serve as a guardian. He ended up being a cause of suffering instead. Julie and her mother were allegedly both treated cruelly by him. After enduring the atrocities of war, home ought to have been a haven of refuge. However, Julie was unable to flee. Just picture yourself as a little kid, trapped with nowhere to hide. Bombs were outside. On the inside, there was another type of terror. Julie came clean about the mental and physical abuse she suffered at her stepfather later in life. This tragic reality further enriches her narrative. Still, she managed to triumph in the end. Music was the one thing that offered her hope, so she clung to it. As her peers sought refuge in shelters or played in the streets, Julie focused on developing her skill.
Nothing anyone had ever heard before could compare to her voice. That was powerful. You could see it.
And its intensity was sufficient to obliterate her earliest, darkest memories.
A legend like Julie Andrews does not emerge out of thin air.
Talent, determination, and the stamp of approval from the royal family all contributed to her meteoric rise to fame. Sure, there was a time when she was merely a girl with a voice that could stop people in their tracks, before Hollywood, before Broadway, and before she was nearly flawless in every aspect.
But you know what? No less than the British royal family was among the first to notice that. Performing for the Queen Mother as a teenager was a remarkable honor for Julie Andrews. But you know what? So Julie was informed by the Queen Mother. Tonight, she sung with such grace. A star was born in an instant.
Having already established herself in the English theatre scene by the late 1940s, Julie knew that dominating the UK alone wouldn't be sufficient. She aspired to great things. She intended to become a famous American star, just like so many others before her.
Julie Andrews was warmly embraced by Broadway in the mid-1950s.
Her extraordinary talent was initially showcased to American audiences in the musical The Boyfriend, which was her first big break. The young woman's angelic voice caused quite a stir, and soon everyone was wondering who she was. Broadway didn't have to wonder for long, though, for Julie landed the role that would alter the course of history in 1956.
My Fair Lady's Eliza Doolittle.
If you're even vaguely familiar with the theater, you can tell that this was a major event.
You couldn't have picked a more era-appropriate musical than this one. What about Julie?
She was the showstopper. The role of the feisty flower girl who becomes a lady of high society was nominated for a Tony Award for her performance. Impressive, considering that they were performing for the Queen Mother only a short while ago.
However, Julie Andrews had more in store.
Julie reprised her iconic role as Guinevere in Camelot following her spectacular performance in My Fair Lady.
In 1960, Broadway was experiencing its zenith.
The plot, the romance, the songs, and Julie Andrews herself were all huge hits with the audience. There was obviously a connection between her and Richard Burton, who portrayed King Arthur.
The music left a lasting impression.
Additionally, Julie was nominated for a Tony Award for her work on another occasion. Impressive, 2 Tony nominations in such a short period of time. She was obviously more than simply a gifted singer by this stage. She was an aristocrat of Broadway.
A startling change of events occurs at this point in the novel, though. This is 1964. Broadway is already smitten with Julie Andrews. However, Hollywood?
Their doubts persisted. Actually, Julie was not cast in the film adaptation of My Fair Lady, the very part she had played on stage.
Instead, they chose Audrey Hepburn. However, destiny had different intentions instead.
After seeing Julie perform in a Broadway performance, Walt Disney cast her as Mary Poppins in his next film. Suddenly, everyone met the enchanted nanny who could soar through the air, belt out a tune, and get the grouchiest dads to break out into a rooftop dance.
Julie was named Best Actress at the Oscars for her performance in Mary Poppins. Now for the most exciting part.
She took her trophy at the ceremony and playfully complimented Jack Warner, the producer who had passed her over for My Fair Lady, for his rejection.
Impressive blend of refined and brutal. However, Julie had more to do.
In The Sound of Music, Julie portrayed Maria von Trapp, another legendary character, a year later. The success of this picture went far beyond its box office receipts. To this day, viewers can be found dancing in broad fields while imitating Maria or singing along with Do Re Mi. Julie was nominated for another Academy Award for her acclaimed performance. She may not have won that time, but she had solidified her position as a Hollywood royalty nonetheless. Her personal life was front and center as well, even while her career was skyrocketing.
Julie wed Tony Walton, a set designer, before she became a Hollywood celebrity. They exchanged wedding vows in Surrey, England, on May 10, 1959. By the way, do you know who else attended the wedding? Miss Maggie Smith herself, of course.
Indeed, Professor McGonagall was present, undoubtedly exuding an air of irreproachable wit and beauty. While Julie was a cast member in Humpty Dumpty in 1948, Tony was the first person she met.
An authentic performance, indeed. A girl was born to them. It was a sad ending to Emma Walton Hamilton's 1962 romance. In 1968, they had a divorce. Blake Edwards, the director of the Pink Panther films in 10, in which Julie co-starred with Dudley Moore and Bo Derek, was Julie's new love interest after her divorce. After marrying Blake, Julie became a stepmother to his kids, Jennifer and Jeffrey. However, their love story continued beyond that point. Amy, whose birth name was Amelia, Lee, and Joanna Lynn, and her Vietnamese adoptive sister Joanna were added to their family in the 1970s. Blake and Julie were a couple for 41 years. That is absolutely astounding in Hollywood, where marriages can last as brief as a film's duration. Julie was there for Blake right up until the end of his life in 2010, when he tragically passed away from pneumonia. The loss was devastating. Theirs is still one of the most heartwarming Hollywood love stories. A life like Julie Andrews's is something most of us can only imagine. Among her many accomplishments are an Oscar, roles in several classic films, performing for kings and queens, and a love that lasts a lifetime. Hold just a second, her tale is far from over. Because although her acting and singing are well known, the tragic accident that almost derailed her career is seldom known. There was merit in the claim that Julie was the youngest prima donna in Britain. She had an operatic, brilliant, and ethereal voice. It was so inviting that it might warm the hearts of the most hardened souls. It appeared so easy, and that was the nicest part. Decades later, in The Princess Diaries, she portrayed the role of a princess who could sing high notes with ease and look very stunning. However, not even the most flawless voices can escape the effects of time. It was only natural for Julie's voice to change as she aged. Her music became fuller and deeper, and she became increasingly difficult to reach her highest notes. Julie breezes over this change, unlike some other singers. She decided to accept it rather than fight it. Over time, her voice underwent a remarkable transformation, becoming more emotionally charged and profound. Tragically, though, that was not the end. Julie noticed something was up in 1997 while playing in Victor Victoria on Broadway. She had lost some of the power in her voice. She began to have persistent hoarseness. Nodules are tiny growths that can impact the voice. Doctors informed her that she had several on her vocal cords. So she did the natural thing for a singer. She had them surgically removed. But a terrible event happened. The operation did more harm than good, damaging her vocal cords and stripping her of the legendary singing voice that had propelled her to stardom. Do you have any idea? From being the voice of Mary Poppins one second to struggling to hold a tune the next, that's only one day. To say that it devastated Julie would be an understatement. Once upon a time, there was a woman named this who would not sing ballads because she was afraid she would cry too much. At this point, she had entirely lost it. And now for the exciting part. Julie denied ever having nodules, as she admitted afterward. Yes, I understand. She clarified afterwards that her raspiness had nothing to do with growths. Not to mention the tension that comes from performing night after night, which is known as muscular striation. She lost her singing ability after the unnecessary procedure. It was terrible enough for Julie Andrews to lose her voice, but she was not going to take it lying down. She resisted, actually. Scott Kessler and Jeffrey Libon, two of the surgeons at Mount Sinai Hospital who had operated on her neck, were named in her 1999 malpractice action. Initially, these medical professionals gave her the reassuring word that her voice will be back in 6 weeks. That gave me hope. Although 6 weeks, 6 months, and 2 years elapsed, her singing voice still remained absent. In 1999, Jennifer Edwards, her stepdaughter, put it best. There has been no return in the past 2 years. Julie Andrews realized it wasn't just chance at that point. She was not going to tolerate the fact that something had gone horribly wrong. After Julie's surgery went wrong and her lawyers claimed the doctors had lied to her about the risks, they sued for medical malpractice. After more than a year of litigation, a settlement was finally reached in September 2000. It wasn't little change, but the exact sum is still a mystery. But no amount of cash could restore her voice. The quality that had made her famous had slipped away from her. Naturally, the doctors never took responsibility. But come on, Julie Andrews is suing you because you ruined her voice. You really messed up. The death of Julie Andrews was a devastating blow to her profession and personal life for a woman whose voice could soar across 4 octaves. Following the unfortunate operation in 1997, her once impressive soprano voice was diminished to a delicate alto.
"I can sing Old Man River like no one's business," was Andrew's famous quip, demonstrating her mastery of humor in the face of tragedy. Actually, there was suffering lurking beyond the surface of the comedy. She came clean later on about how the botched operation had affected her life. In the early 2000s, Andrews sought the advice of Stephen M. Zeitels, who oversaw the Center for Laryngeal Surgery and Voice Rehabilitation at Massachusetts General Hospital. His expertise in voice restoration was well known, so there was a glimmer of optimism that her singing voice may be revived. Andrews had 4 operations done by Zeitels over the years. These operations were not light. They were revolutionary and spot on. What is the outcome? She gained strength and a clearer voice as she spoke. She sung beautifully, though. Forever had that enchantment vanished. Dealing with a shift in who you are can be challenging. This was more than only the loss of notes for Andrews. A crucial aspect of her identity was snatched away. She had the option to vanish, hide, and allow her resentment to rule her. Yet she chose to reimagine her identity instead. She didn't give in to hopelessness, being the strong person that she is. No, she changed. Aside from being an icon, Julie Andrews proved it. Combative, she is. Despite the catastrophe, she refused to be defined by it. Her voice alone was enough to land her memorable parts, so she dove headfirst into voice acting, narrated, and more. Andrews demonstrated that her charisma and talent would outlive her singing voice by narrating films and surprising audiences in interviews. It should be remembered that the procedures had other purposes besides advancing her career. She wished her grandkids could hear her clearly, Andrews stated at one point. She never stopped thinking about her loved ones and finding methods to keep in touch with them, no matter how tough things got.